Hey up viewers and viewers, my name is General Red Strategist and welcome back to Sir Being Hunted episode 510 now. So, my freaking Get Shrek challenge absolutely failed in the last episode. I really balls that up, didn't I? As always. I mean, surprise, surprise, another challenge failed, Red? Another one? Shouldn't really alarm you at all, should it, ladies and gentlemen? You know how it always goes with these challenges. There's always a very good bloody chance that I'll just crash and burn so spectacularly, eh? But that's fine, that's okay, I guess. So, it's podcast style episode time, basically. So you guys out there are all doing well. I didn't really have a particular challenge in mind to do just yet, so I thought, screw it. I'm just gonna friggin' hang around, have a bit of fun, as I always do in this here game. Why the hell not and all that. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, I hope you guys are all doing well. It's an evening, as I'm going to record this, a Thursday evening, in fact. Friday tomorrow, weekend's almost upon us, which will be good. But, work as usual has just been busy, of course. I've been marking a load of formative assignments recently. I've still got a few to do, but very, very interesting. They've been very broad in some of their points. Which, if you've watched any of my previous Sir Being Hunted episodes, especially the ones where I talk about academic writing and all that, you know that sometimes in social sciences breadth of points is not necessarily the thing that you want to go for. Just because then, you're not very, you're leaving yourself with less room to go into depth and all that. But yes, that's not what I really want to talk about though, because I've talked about it so many times before and all that. No, what I actually did have in mind was something interesting. About a few weeks ago, do you ever have this sometimes where, you're on YouTube, you're cruising around, and basically, now obviously with YouTube, the way obviously the algorithm works on the site, it looks at the kind of things obviously that you've watched, and then it thinks, oh, here's something similar to that you might be interested in, and it recommends that to you, and that's basically how the algorithm functions. But every so often, when you're when you're on YouTube, watching videos, and you go onto the home page, every once in a while it recommends things seemingly out of the blue, just completely random things that you look at and you think, I'm not sure why you're recommending that to me, given that I haven't really watched anything that even feels like it would be similar to the thing that you're recommending to me and all that. And I get my fair share sometimes of recommendations on YouTube whenever I'm just cruising around looking for something to watch. And of course, so what I'm basically saying is that a couple of weeks ago, that sort of happened to me. Now, sometimes the things that YouTube recommends to you, of course, are kind of weird, and you think, why on earth would you think that I'd be interested in seeing that? And of course, you're not interested in seeing it, and ultimately, you just sort of leave it. You don't bother looking at it or anything like that. You just friggin' palm it off. You just ignore it completely. But in essence, sometimes, of course, you come across the odd thing that actually you look at and you think, that's actually kind of interesting. So you watch it, and then before you know it, you've discovered something new and quite interesting. You've discovered something new that actually kind of does appeal to you. And of course, I've had my share of things like that here on YouTube, definitely. So the thing that YouTube recommended to me about a few weeks ago was a video from a channel called Lackadaisy. And essentially what the video was, it was like a 12-minute loop, an animated, flapper cat girl, just doing sort of like a Charleston dance move. I'm going to say a flapper cat girl. I don't mean like some anime thing. No. I mean like some Disney-style animation of a character who is clearly like an anthropomorphic cat in sort of 1920s clothing, doing sort of like a dance move from the Charleston. And I'm not going to lie, I actually watched the whole thing. 12 minutes of just this dance loop, because the music was actually kind of catchy. It was sort of like a techno version of 1920s jazz. Well, no, not techno version, but it was sort of like, it was 1920s jazz, but with clearly sort of more modern technological twist to it. Like I say, it was very catchy music, and the animation was very smooth and just really pleasant to look at. Now, the thing was, you know, sometimes when you find videos like that which actually do take your interest, you then click onto the channel to go and see, you know, what is this channel? What's it all about? What does it do? So I saw this Lackadaisy channel, and I went on, and apparently what it is Lackadaisy is an internet comic series by a American artist called, I think she's called Tracy something. I can't remember her name now. I've already forgotten. But essentially, it's kind of like this Disney-style cartoon vibe, and it's about cats who, well, it's basically sort of set in 1920s America, except all the characters are cats, anthropomorphic cats. And basically, I think the main setting is supposed to be a speakeasy called the Lackadaisy, and essentially the characters are all bootleggers. That's what it is, because it's obviously, you know, 1920s America, prohibition and all that. And I haven't read any of the comics, but I certainly looked into what exactly it was. And so apparently this channel Lackadaisy, they're making an animated film adaptation of it. And so I just sort of looked at the art style, and I thought to myself, this art style is really gorgeous. I actually quite like it. It's really, really good. Because even if, you know, this actual franchise itself isn't necessarily aimed at someone like me, well, I say that, but actually, having said that, who knows? I probably would enjoy it. I can still sort of appreciate the art style as well. Because, you know, if you've got good art, you'll definitely be eye-catching and all that. So, definitely the art style, the visuals of it, caught my attention. And I thought it looked really, really good. And so if you like go onto the Lackadaisy channel, they have a lot of like short clips of animation roughs, things like that. And they're kind of entertaining, I won't lie. So yeah, I kind of discovered something very interesting when YouTube recommended that 12-minute dance loop to me. And you know what, I kind of am curious about just learning more about this franchise. Because it just looks kind of weird and kind of crazy. Zany rather, not crazy, that's not really the right word at all, but, you know, kind of wacky, I suppose, is really what I'm trying to say. So yeah, if you're into cartoons, things like that, animations, and you're into sort of stylized artworks that look like it could have come out of an old school 1940s or 50s Disney movie, something like that, then maybe go check Lackadaisy out. But you know, it actually got me thinking more generally on the subject of like 1920s America. Because the thing is, 1920s USA is obviously a very interesting time period, and I can remember when I was in high school, obviously this is way, way back, this is freaking years ago, but when I was doing GCSE history, one of the modules that we did was actually on the United States between the two world wars. And so of course that was looking predominantly at the 1920s. It was looking at culture and social life in the, you know, in America during the 20s, during the roaring 20s, the jazz age, you know, flappers, gangsters, prohibition, stuff like that. It was very interesting. And of course ultimately it got to obviously like 1929, the Wall Street crash, the resultant Great Depression, and of course the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the, you know, the New Deal, stuff like that. That's kind of where it went up to. But you know, the 1920s, more generally speaking, is just a kind of period in history which, I don't know, I just really like the vibe of it. Because obviously it was an era of, you know, it had a very kind of particularly interesting aesthetic to it. It was just fascinating. And I really do like the vibe of the 1920s sort of jazz era. I really do like the vibe, of course, of all the, you know, like jazz stuff. Flappers and ragtime and all this. Just real good stuff. Really interesting to look at. So I've been looking on YouTube recently as well for like compilations of 1920s/30s like jazz and ragtime music. And there's some, you know, real good big compilations out there that you can find. Really enjoyable to actually listen to. So, you know, that was all prompted just by the fact that I was recommended a video of an animated series that is in, or an animated movie rather, that's in production at the moment. So who would have thought it, eh? That I would be sort of looking into that with interest. But God, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to sort of like remember, you know, the history of the 1920s from what I can remember. from my GCSE history lesson years. Because obviously, like, you know, everyone thinks of the end of the 1920s. And you think of people like Al Capone, you know, gangsters like him. It's fun. It's just fascinating how in America you had the Prohibition era where they actually tried to ban alcohol. Of course, it just went down so badly. It just resulted in massive organised crime, stuff like that. And of course, Al Capone ended up being convicted of tax evasion in the end because they couldn't really get him for anything else, but he ended up in Alcatraz, the famous prison in San Francisco Bay, isn't it? That's where it is, yes. But what else do I remember from that era, 1920s USA? I can actually name some of the presidents at that time as well, because there's some presidents in US history at that point who I think are generally seen as being some of the more obscure ones. So obviously, at the end of the First World War, Woodrow Wilson, who had obviously proposed his 14 points for a peaceful world. He wanted to get America involved in the League of Nations, but of course that didn't happen because America at that time was more isolationist in its inclinations. It didn't want to be involved with the rest of the world, really. So of course Woodrow Wilson then got defeated in an election, lost out to Warren G. Harding. And I think after Warren G. Harding in the sort of early 20s, he eventually was replaced by Calvin Coolidge, I think was his name. Old double C. He's a president who, the only thing I know about him is just an obscure quote that is attributed to him. Apparently Calvin Coolidge once said, after attending a theatre performance that was really bad, someone asked him, "What did you think of the singer's execution?" or something like that, to which Calvin Coolidge purportedly replied, "Yeah, I'm all for it," because apparently it was a bad performance. And that's literally all I really know about Calvin Coolidge. I don't know anything about his presidency, whether he was famous for doing anything, whether he had any big achievements, or whether there were any big scandals that rocked his time in office, anything like that. I really don't know. And then, of course, after Calvin Coolidge, it was Herbert Hoover, old Double H, who, not to be confused with J. Edgar Hoover, who is someone else entirely. But Herbert Hoover, of course, he was president at the time of the Wall Street crash, and the problem was Herbert Hoover, I believe, was more of a believer in laissez-faire economics, which of course didn't go down very popularly with the American public, who, well, of course, obviously at the time when the Wall Street crash happened, there was the Depression, massive economic recession, people very much ended up on the breadline, and so, Herbert Hoover kind of lost out because people were just, they didn't want laissez-faire economics. They wanted people to help them. They wanted the government to help, which is why, Franklin Delano Roosevelt got elected, because of course he came in proposing the New Deal, investment in the economy, in alphabet agencies, things like this, to try and get the economy stimulated again. So yes, it was very interesting. Now, the other Hoover, I just mentioned a moment ago, J. Edgar Hoover, he's actually a pretty big figure in American history as well. Though, his infamy doesn't just come from the 1920s. J. Edgar Hoover, of course, some of you may already know, was head of the Bureau of Investigation, what later became the FBI. And he was head of the friggin' Bureau of Investigation and, by extension the FBI when it eventually renamed itself. He was head of that right throughout the 20s, right up until the 1970s, so about 50 bloody years. And the thing about J. Edgar Hoover was, he's a really dark figure in some ways, really morally ambiguous, and sometimes, even though he was head of a law enforcement agency, was known sometimes for doing things which, certainly by our standards today, we would sort of question, and we would think, what was your justification for that? Because I believe he was obviously very paranoid, especially as it got into the Cold War, and of course there was paranoia in the US about, communism and communist infiltration, things like that. He probably was part of that sort of more, well, kind of part of that more paranoid quarter. Because the thing is, he ordered bugging and spying on lots of domestic figures within American life. Like Martin Luther King, for example. I'm pretty sure J. Edgar Hoover was basically of the belief that Martin Luther King was a subversive and all that. even though he wasn't. There's no evidence that he was, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, that's the thing. And then, but you know, J. Edgar Hoover, of course, it wasn't the only one in American history who was given into that kind of paranoia at times about communism during its Cold War past. Obviously, the biggest sort of example of that was in the 1950s when you had McCarthyism, and there was just hysteria. Basically, McCarthyism, if you don't know, was kind of very much put forward, well, it was very much driven, I should say, by Senator Joseph McCarthy, I believe was his name, who basically was accusing American high society, accusing American politicians, even at one point the American military establishment. He was just sort of convinced that there were frigging communist infiltrators in every aspect of American society. And of course, like, you know, for a period, lots of people believed him, and there was just hysteria. But then eventually, I think people started to look at what he was saying and was like, you know, this guy's kind of mad. This guy's kind of a bit fucking crazy. Why are we listening to him? Because I think eventually he picked on the American military command, and of course, as soon as he did, I believe that was basically the start of his undoing. Because he was basically questioning American military commanders, people who were probably decorated war heroes from World War II, and so that didn't go over too well. And you know what? It's probably just as well that it didn't go over too well, because the thing is, you never want hysteria in politics, things like that, because that just destroys rational debate, and hysteria is the thing to watch out for because of the fact that it poisons the debate, essentially. It makes people believe and say and do crazy things which often are quite harmful and a bit dangerous, and it just doesn't really work in proper sort of civil democratic discourse and all that. Sorry, this is getting kind of political all of a sudden. I'm going to shut up about that, really. God, to think that I started out talking about a thing that I encountered on YouTube, and suddenly to get to talking about politics in the USA in the 1950s or whatever. How did I go from one to the other? But that's the thing, sometimes it's always the conversation that I have in these podcast style episodes are always probably giving people whiplash all the time, just with how I sort of veer between topics just to keep the conversation going and all that. But, as long as people find it interesting, that's usually fine, isn't it? You find it interesting, don't you, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, I certainly hope so. But yes, Lackadaisy, folks. Go check it out. Very interesting looking animated movie. And I'll probably, like I say, definitely look into the Lackadaisy comics. I'm pretty sure they're available online. You just type Lackadaisy into Google, they should come up. With its cast of colourful characters and whatever else have you. But like I say, it's very Disney-esque. But it looks very charming, and it looks very innocent and adorable. So I definitely want to give it a shot and see if it's actually any good, which I'm sure it will be, and all that. Because the thing is, usually if you have something, whether it's a game, a book, a movie, piece of music, a comic, an anime, a manga, whatever the medium might be, if you can tell that the creator has clearly put some heart and soul into it, then quite often I end up finding that I enjoy it, even if there are other aspects of it that are kind of bad or not very well made. Often I can still sort of tell that someone really put the effort in on it, and it was kind of their sort of love child, their pet project, their baby. And sometimes even, if that's the case, even in spite of problems, I can still enjoy something. Alright, I'm starting to ramble now, so I'm probably going to wrap this episode up here. So that was a quick podcast-style episode with me, General Red Strategist. I may actually just record another one straight after this, to be honest, because I've still got things on my mind that I want to sort of talk about and get off my chest. So, hope you'll join me for part 511, which will be coming soon. Facebook and links down below, along with the links to my propagandist channel for anyone interested. If you enjoyed, I like to always appreciate and all that jazz. Other than that, goodbye all. Keep sending my units up to deal with any enemies. How these guys doing over here? I think what we really ideally need to do is just... God. Are we doing okay? I think we might be. We might just be okay. They can shoot upwards, which is the good news. They are saying, oh god, they're sending freaking counter-attacks units to try and deal with me, aren't they? Oh bloody hell. This is not what we need over here. we're holding out. We're holding out. Very much, I think. Right, what have we got? Bunker, artillery. Let's get another artillery platform back in there. They're not taking over this. They are struggling to do so, which is good. And I think we are slowly